Tiger style.
Tiger style. Yo. Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to fuck with. Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to fuck with. Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to fuck with.
If you're one of the greatest tournament players in the world and you decide to buy into the WSOP Main Event, you'll need to make some adjustments. One such adjustment is recognizing the fact that virtually none of the creatures you'll encounter will be a perfectly balanced bot like you're used to playing against. Rather, most will have glaring weaknesses. And the way you accrue massive piles of chips is by making reads and then exploiting those weaknesses. In this video, we will showcase Super Pro Steven Chidwick attempting to do just that against an unknown enigma known only as Master Wu. So we're on day 4 of the main event. The bubble has just burst, but there's still over 1,000 players remaining. Master Wu opens the low jack to over 3x. The action folds around to Steven in the small blind, and although he certainly could raise here, he decides to just flat, likely due to intimidation. The flop comes for ace-5 rainbow, and Wu continues with around a 57% pot bet. So in this type of spot, middle position versus small blind, the small blind's flatting range is likely to be quite tight, comprised mostly of ace-x and pocket pairs. This means that Wu is unlikely to have a significant advantage with his wider range, especially since his pre-flop overpair advantage is mitigated by the ace-high flop, and so he should, in theory, be doing a decent amount of checking. That being said, Master Wu definitely could have just as many, if not more, netted hands compared to the small blind, like pocket aces, 5s or 4s, and ace-king, so a larger bet or check strategy seems reasonable. And although 57% isn't huge in terms of absolute value, it's not significantly less than geometric sizing at this stack depth, which would be around 72% of the pot. So Wu's betting range with this sizing should, in theory, be somewhat polarized, consisting primarily of top pairs plus, and then some trash, to target Stevie's weaker aces and underpairs. Chidwick then decides to simply call, which is the standard play according to this sim. His hand doesn't need much protection, and since Wu has started to polarize with his flop bet, it means that the top part of his range should be relatively strong, and he should continue betting with decent frequency on later streets. The turn is the jack of spades, and it goes check check. So in Wu's position, we see that the solver continues with its polarizing strategy, where it favors the 80% pot bet on this relatively blank turn that does not dramatically shift the equity profiles of either player. This means that when Wu checks, it likely makes his range somewhat mid-heavy, primarily consisting of middling pairs that don't want to play for stacks. The river is the king of spades, and Chidwick decides to bet 2/3 pot with his 2-pair, which is solver approved, though the machine also likes checking this hand as well, and we see that most of the range actually prefers to check. This is a function of the small blind being at a significant nut disadvantage on this particular river. As mentioned, when Wu checked on the blank turn after c-betting relatively large on the flop, it made his range mid-heavy. However, one of the benefits of being in position is that even if you cap your range with a check back, it can become immediately uncapped by the next community card. In contrast, when the out-of-position player checks a polar betting range, there is no buffer. The in-position player has the opportunity to immediately punish the capped range. And this is part of the reason why, generally speaking, the out-of-position player's betting range tends to be more merged with a higher proportion of traps, whereas the in-position player's betting range tends to be more polar. So in this case, because the small blind's pre-flop flatting range should have primarily consisted of ace-x and pocket pairs, and he should have folded most of the few suited Broadway combos on the flop to the large c-bet, it is less likely that he has a straight or flush with the ace of spades on the board, but it's very possible that Wu has a straight or flush with his wider range and the flop initiative, thus this river has uncapped him. Now obviously this wouldn't be the case if Master Wu is the type that always barrels his draws. In that scenario, Stevie's range would significantly strengthen on the river, which should prompt him to bet with higher frequency and with larger sizings. That all being said, even if Wu does check back some of his draws, perhaps to avoid being check raised, Ace-Jack is still strong enough to bet, primarily targeting one-paired hands, which should make up most of Wu's range. Master Wu then scoffs in the face of Stevie's meager bet, and he raises it up, putting the Super Pro in an absolute blender as he proceeds to go into a long tank. Given Wu's raise, it's very unlikely that Chidwick's 2-pair beats any of Wu's value. Even if we were to assume that Wu would raise here with something like ace-king or set, Stevie's ace-jack would still be a mere bluff catcher that could go either way as a call or fold. This means that from a game theory perspective, both calling or folding would be the correct play. But of course, in reality, there's only one correct decision. And GTO alone can't give us the optimal strategy when villain is not playing perfect GTO himself, which, as we noted at the top, will always be the case, particularly in the main event. So how can one adept at game theory like Steven incorporate the human factor into his decision-making process, while at the same time maintain a solid foundational strategy which prevents him from falling down a slippery slope and turning into a dirty diaper? GTO constrained exploitative play. That is, a strategy that blends theoretically sound and exploitative play by loosely tethering you to the baseline, but also giving you the flexibility to make adjustments when you have reads on your opponent. As a practical matter, this means that you generally follow the GTO strategies that are pure, since deviating will often lose you significant EV. But for any strategies that are indifferent, i.e. mixed between multiple actions that all have the same or similar EV, instead of randomizing, you shift those strategies one way or the other based on villain's tendencies. So in this case, if Steven thought Wu was underbluffing, he would just pure fold this hand. And if Steven thought Wu was overbluffing, he would pure call it. This then raises the question, what type of player is Master Wu? Well, the initial gut instinct for most would likely be to put Wu in the old man coffee category, and these sorts of players tend not to be very aggressive because, well, their balls no longer produce a lot of testosterone. But what happens if, instead of old man coffee, villain is old man green tea who simply does not give a fuck? If you've ever looked around a card room, particularly in the LA area, you may feel like you've been magically transported to the Wuhan wet market. For better or worse, Asians have a lot of gamble in them. It's embedded in their DNA, along with math skills and liking boba. And this includes decrepit old Asians that look like they just woke up from a long-ass nap. And so although many in Stevie's shoes would have likely just auto-mucked in this spot, an argument could be made for calling based on this specific subset of player type. But nevertheless, Stevie ultimately submits to Master Wu, tossing his hand away. So did he make the right read, or did he underestimate his opponent's abilities? Well, as it turns out, super pros with almost $50 million in tournament winnings aren't the only ones with tricks up their sleeve. So the next question is, was Master Wu's play just plain dumb luck, or was there some method to the madness? Let's compare his line to the machine to find out. On the flop, although the solver did not bet Wu's specific hand with significant frequency, betting this sizing doesn't lose much EV, and there are plenty of other similar low equity hands that did fire in this spot, such as Queen Jack off and Jack 10 suited, so probably an okay play. On the turn, the solver checked 100% of its second pairs, which pulled ahead of the many under pairs in the small blinds range, also good. And on the river, although again the solver does not raise this combo with significant frequency, all options, calling, folding, or raising, are essentially indifferent break-even plays. So what kind of ninjutsu is this? Well, first off, it's probably safe to assume that Stevie's entire betting range is either stronger or weaker than Wu's specific hand, which renders it as a pure bluff catcher. And whenever you're in a situation where you have some hands in your range that want to raise, such as flushes and straights in this case, your bluff catchers will often make the best bluff raising candidates. So how do you decide which ones to raise? From Wu's perspective, your main focus shouldn't be on villain's bluffs because you beat these hands in any event. Instead, as a practical matter, your main focus should be on the value portion of villain's range that is likely to call. And among Wu's bluff catchers, Jack 10 does actually have some decent bluffing characteristics from a card removal perspective because it blocks one of Stevie's main calling candidates, Ace Jack. Now, according to this specific sim, Wu's best bluffing candidate, which accrues the most EV when raising, is actually Queen Jack with a Queen of Spades. This might seem odd given that Stevie shouldn't have any flushes or straights containing the Queen of Spades in his range. But when bluffing, card removal isn't just about blocking villain's best value. There's another level of card removal analysis, which is about blocking villain's best blockers. Specifically, Queen Jack with the Queen of Spades blocks the tiny percentage of Ace Queen with the Queen of Spades in Stevie's range, which is one of his best bet calling candidates because it blocks both Wu's flushes and straights. Now we should note that these are minute differences which depend on the specific range matchups. For example, it's questionable whether Stevie would even bet this size on the river with a mirror Ace Queen. And Jack 10, although perhaps not the ideal raising combo, is, from a theory perspective, a fine bluff raising candidate as it blocks Stevie's Ace Jack, which blocks Wu's Aces and Jacks. Also, at the end of the day, putting aside all of the theoretical mumbo jumbo, the only thing that really matters, bottom line, is winning. And this gangster move resulted in Master Wu dragging a massive pot.
Yeah, we live and thorough, assassinating every single motherfucking borough. From Staten to Brooklyn to Queens, the Bronx and Harlem, all the way to Maryland, yeah, we coming for all of them. Bobby Tarantino to the digital, my shit is pivotal. Smoking chronic, no medicinal. Who you know assembled a clan like Voltron? The one and only Logic, the God, the Dawn, I'm gone.